Dokunma keyfine, yalan dünyanın, yalan dünyanın ipini eline dolamış gider, dolamış gider. Gözlerimin yaşı bana gizlidir, dertli dertsizi sulamış gider. Udey udey udey sulamış gider, dertli dertsizi sulamış gider. Gözlerimin yaşı bana gizlidir, dertli dertsizi sulamış gider. Udey udey udey. Kimi hızlı gider, uzun yolu tutar, uzun yolu tutar. Kimi altın satar, kimi pul yutar, kimi pul yutar. Kimi son bulmaz, kimi bal yutar, kimi parmağını yalamış gider. Odey odey odey yalamış gider. Kimi parmağını yalamış gider. Kimi soğan bulmaz, kimi bal yutar, kimi parmağını yalamış gider. Odey odey odey. Mahsuni bu nasıl yazı mahsuni, yazı mahsuni. Bazen şerif olur, bazı mahsuni, bazı mahsuni. Sılada anasız kuzu mahsuni, insanlık peşinde melemiş gider. Odey odey odey melemiş gider. İnsanlık peşinde melemiş gider. Sılada anasız kuzu mahsuni, insanlık peşinde melemiş gider. Odey odey odey.
Honestly, this sounds pretty good. Fair distance from the mic. Distance. This sounds pretty good. Maybe I need to be louder. Alright, changed a bunch of settings. Let's see how this sounds. Changed a bunch of settings. Let's see how this one sounds. surrounded by the music in person. So if this sounds right, then that's the magic formula. Plus a couple of dB. This is like, you have to play around with it to get it right, I think.
Place where I was meant to be, where I can breathe again. Nature of my mind, like a river bends, an endless refrain I cannot speak, calls out to me again.
Sounds like I'm in a fucking cafe or something.
Light upon the darkness that hides the dawn. I see beauty in the winding road. Move slow. There are no limits on the soul. I'm free.
Threshold is the main one I have to play around with, I think. Threshold.
Standing in the waves, floating in the blues, a freedom that lives inside the truth, takes me home again. Sun shines a light upon the darkness that hides the dawn. I see beauty in the winding road. Move slow. There are no limits.
Minimum threshold. See, I don't want to put up the gain too much, because then it's like, I want it to be natural. I don't want to be like artificially loud or something. I just wish my voice was louder, you know. Alright, I just did a compressor both ways. Let's see how this sounds. Trying out this noise cancellation thing. I think right now it sounds good enough that I can just start streaming and shit. Does it sound like my voice is expand right now? Somehow expanded, I don't know how, but checking for the expanding effect. High ratio. Low ratio, low threshold expander. Low ratio, high ratio. This one is low ratio. And low ratio, high threshold. I mean, I don't know if I need an expander. Maybe I need a little bit of gain. But I don't know if I need an expander. It sounds pretty good. Low ratio on music. Does the opposite work? At this point, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just like going about knobs and turning dials and whatever, but outside of that, I don't know what I'm doing. Whistle, or what do you call it? All bells and whistles. I have all bells and whistles on right now, so this one should sound pretty good.
All the lonely people. All the lonely people. Where do they all come from?
for aliens that as the technology develops, they take form more and more in as information.
Sort of a unified force. Well, maybe they're not unified. Whether your concepts muddy the picture, we're only going to give them limited information. Right? And yeah, maybe we could sit down like you and I and have a conversation, but then they would make assumptions, humans would then make assumptions about us that aren't true, because we're not humans. Right? So let's stay at arm's length. Let's just let them know that we're here. Right? And here's the limited amount of communication. Again, this notion that if you give somebody everything, they'll get lazy. And, you know, if they've been around as long as they have, they've seen every kind of thing that can go wrong. And so it's they know, as much as they might want to step in, that would be a wrong thing.
Yeah, you have to also understand that the amount of wisdom they carry.
Yeah. You know, and so it's very easy as well for religions to. I don't want to get into a whole religious conversation, but you could you could see how religions could call them angels or devils or what have you, because again, if you're trying to fit it into a framework of cultural understanding, the first thing you reach for is God. And so when you look at what these things are, and again, with the angels and the devils, in a similar sort of way, their communication is limited. They just kind of give little, what's the Oracle of Delphi? They kind of give these Delphic pronouncements, and then it's up to you to figure out what it is that they really mean.
Stephen Greer claimed that a skeleton discovered in Atacama region of Chile might be an alien. You reached out to him and took on the task of proving or disproving that with the rigor of science. The result is a paper titled Whole Genome Sequencing of Atacama Skeleton Shows Novel Mutations Linked with Dysplasia. Can you tell this full story?
The story was, as you put it right there, correct. Reached out, got a sample of the body, did the DNA sequencing, then worked with a team of 2 other Stanford scientists and Roche sequencing group, Roche Diagnostics, and probably a total team of about 11 or so people. And as is standard in these kinds of things, the professors actually don't do the work. The students do the work and figured out the answer. And then we helped them put together the story. And the story was simply that it was human, 100%. I went into it thinking it was originally a monkey of some sort. I got kind of excited a few months into the process thinking, well, what happens if it is an alien? Right?
Can you describe some of the characteristics of the skeleton that make it unique and interesting?
Primarily, it had dysmorphias of the brain. And so the first thing I did, actually, when I got pictures of it, I took it to a local expert at Stanford, and he was on the paper. And he was the world expert in pediatric bone dysmorphias. He literally wrote the book and on this, because that's what you do. You go to an expert when it's outside of your field of interest. And he said, well, I haven't seen this particular collection of mutations before, or this physiology before, but here's what I think it might be. And he said, but based on the size of the thing and the bone density, it would appear to be like 6 or 7 years old. Now, again, that's the thing where I think the lay public speculation like that and turns it into a fact. No one ever said that it was that age. We only said that the bones made it look like it was that age. But then we went back and looked for genetic explanations of why things might look the way they did. And if you, again, read the paper, it's very carefully caveated to say that these mutations might result in this. But what we did find was an unexpectedly large number of mutations associated with bone growth in this individual. And it was just a bad roll of the dice, right? You roll the dice enough times with enough people born every year, and someone will roll the wrong dice all at once. So the sad part about it was individuals in the UFO community who wanted to think that there was some sort of conspiracy around it, right? That somebody had somehow convinced all of my students to lie. I mean, come on. You know, I would lose my job, first of all, and they would all be, in trouble forever.
Yeah, but also it's just projecting malevolence onto people that I don't think exists in normal populace, and especially doesn't exist in the scientific community.
Yeah.
The kind of people that go into science, I mean, this is what bothers me with the current distrust of science, is they might be naive, they might not, especially modern science, look at the big picture, philosophical, ethical questions, all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, they're people with integrity and just a deep curiosity for the discovery of cool little things. And There's no there's no malevolence, broadly speaking, in the scientific community. So, I mean, there's a bigger story here, which is, there's a hunger in the populace to discover something anomalous, something new. And, science has to be both open to the anomalous, but also reject the anomalous when the data doesn't support it.
Right.
What do you make of that, walking?
another sun, and a ring that became a rocky planet. And the ratios of the isotopes were determined at the time of that explosion. And so everything in the local solar system is more or less of that ratio, depending upon certain gravitational different, but by fragments of a percent, not whole tens of percent difference. So what do humans use isotopes for? Mostly to blow stuff up. I mean, the vast majority of the isotopes that have been made in the per pound or ton are things like certain ratios of plutonium and uranium to blow stuff up. We don't make or engineer isotopes, which it's today is relatively easy to do, but it's still expensive, for any other reason apart from, let's say, as anti-cancer. We use stable isotopes in money these days as a counterfeiting tool. You basically embed certain ratios of isotopes in to make it harder for counterfeiters to accomplish. And so, but other than that, we don't do anything with that. So why would you make grams of such material in this one case and drop it around on a beach in Brazil?
So which case are we talking about?
This is
Describe that Brazil
this
case.
is the Ubatuba case.
Can you describe this case a little bit further? Like what
Yeah.
material we're talking about, just the full story of the case.
So
It's an interesting one.
It's an interesting one. So a fisherman saw an object that released something, or it exploded, and it was this I've got some big chunks of it, relatively pure magnesium, with obviously something else in it because magnesium burns. So it had something in it that would, other metals, simple alloy, that would prevent it from basically burning up. And so the question is, and so then we had two pieces that came from two different chains of custody, both claimed to be from the same object. At least physically, when you look at the two things, they look the same, right? So we took small fragments of each of them. We put them in an instrument called a secondary ion mass spec, which is an extremely sensitive instrument, and it can see down to 0.0001 mass units, which is important for, let's say, more arcane reasons, but it's a sensitive instrument. And so one of the chains of custody, we had two pieces from the same chain of custody, and then two pieces from the other chain of custody. One of them had completely normal magnesium isotope ratios, magnesium 24, 25, 26, and the other was off. But not just like slightly off, way off. And they were both off to the same extent. So, it was sort of like you had an internal control of what was normal, and then you had this other one which was wrong. And so you're left with, that's kind of a loaded question. Was this a hoax? Were these two chains of custody, one of them a hoax? That somebody purposefully introduced this? Because you could do it. It would cost a lot. I mean, at the time that this was found, I guess the 1970s or so, might have been earlier, I forget. The amount that I had would have cost several tens of thousands of dollars. Again, it's not something you just throw away. And why would you do it in the hope that somebody 30 years from now would pick it up and study it?
Yeah, it's very subtle
Yeah,
troll.
it's a long-term plan. So I just don't know. I just don't know what to make of it. Except it's interesting, so a different kind of question that you're asking is, what constitutes evidence, right? So is this sufficient evidence? Absolutely not. But somebody's put it forward. I have the time. It's my time. I'll study it, and my objective is to sort of take those that I think are credible enough and do a reasonable analysis, put it out there, and maybe somebody else will come up with an idea as to what it is. Now, what would be better is some sort of true technology, right? Something that is obviously, we don't have it, and people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Seth Shostak have come out rightfully and have said, "When you showed up, then we'll pay were actually pieces of aircraft that were invented back in the 1940s. And so take them off the table.
Yeah, but I think, again, I think showing up with technology that we humans would find completely novel is actually a really difficult task for aliens, because it obviously can't be so novel that we don't recognize it
For what it is.
for what it is. And I would say most of the technology aliens likely have would be something we don't recognize. So it's actually a hard problem how to convince ants. Like, you first have to understand what ants are tweeting about, like what they care about, in order to like inject into their culture. Because that's why I think it would be the technology that you could present is in the space of ideas. Let's try to influence individual humans with the encounters, and try to, with this kind of thing that you mentioned about us not taking, messages about us not taking care of the world. It's difficult. I mean, for them to understand, you have to come up with trinkets that impress us. I mean, maybe the very technology, the fascination with the development of technology and the development of technology, the actual act of innovation itself is the thing that they're communicating. I mean, this is kind of what Jacques Vallée thinks about. It's the role of
The control system.
control system. Well, let me ask about Jacques. Who is he? You know him. Who is Jacques Vallée? What have you learned about life, about about UFOs, about technology, about our role in the universe?
Well, I met Jacques actually soon after the whole Atacama thing happened. I was visited by those people associated with the government and the whatever around the what ended up mostly being Havana Supreme, but also Jacques. They were actually working behind the scenes with each other. Said, "Oh, here's this Stanford professor who is willing to talk about this stuff and investigate things. Maybe we should go talk to him." And he reached out through a colleague, and he and I had lunch actually at the Rosewood Inn up on near Sandhill. So Jacques is one of the first openly active scientists, and he's really a scientist in this area, going back to the 1960s. He's put forward a number of ideas, speculations about what it might be that people are interacting with. And the first thing that I learned from him is this notion of what he called kabuki theater. That many of the things that people have seen I remember reading his books and thinking, he uses this word absurd a lot. He said, the things that people claim they see are absurd, right? A ship doesn't land in a farmer's field and then come up and knock on the door and say, "Can I have a glass of water?" And these are stories literally out of newspapers from the 1930s. It's absurd. And the other thing that people say, ships don't crash. If you're so technologically advanced, you don't crash. It's absurd that they crash. So, he says, this is put on as a show. It's an influence campaign. Right? It's not meant to influence individuals, it's meant to influence a culture as a whole. Maybe they don't look at us as individuals. Maybe they look at us as an organism that lives on a planet. Right?
And perhaps rightfully so.
And so that's how you interact with them. That's how you influence them. So that was one of the first things that kind of took me back and realized, wow, there's actually maybe there's a puppet master behind the scenes that's doing this influencing, that all this stuff about aliens is not true per se. They're just a representation of something that is meant to influence. So that was probably the most interesting thing. I mean, the man is brilliant. He's also, it can be, and I'm sorry, Jacques, he can also be incredibly annoying to have a conversation with, because he will pick apart your arguments or anything that you think you know and show you why you don't know what you think you know. And he used the example that, for me, that is all you need is one counter example to any conclusion, and you're wrong. And so I learned from him. I mean, I'm supposed to be a good scientist, but I learned from him, don't talk about conclusions, just talk about the data. Because data's not wrong. I mean, convince yourself that the data's not wrong or not an artifact, but be careful about your conclusions, because whatever is going on, it's much more complicated than we imagine.
Wow, that's powerful. Being able to always step back, because we humans get excited.
Yeah.
We start to jump to conclusions from the data, but always step back.
Well,
powerful. Being able to always step back, because we humans get excited.
Yeah.
We start to jump to conclusions from the data, but always step back.
Well, in some of my Twitter feeds, when I dare to go on Twitter, are full of, well, when are you going to give us the answer? Well, science is not immediate. You're going to have to be patient. And even some of my science colleagues have said, well, where's the data? My answer to them has been, where's been your work to try to produce any? I'm not here to give you everything on a silver platter.
We talked offline how much I love data and machine learning and so on. And it's been really disheartening to see the U.S. government not invest as much as they possibly could into this whole process. So let's jump to the most recent thing, which is, what do you make of the report titled Preliminary Assessment: Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, that was released by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence in June 2021. So this was like, okay, we're going to step back and we're going to where do we stand and where do we hope the future is? What do you make of that report? Is it hopeful? Is it...
I see it as very helpful. Very helpful. I think the adults are finally stepping up in...
The following is a conversation...
Adaptively. And if the right circumstances come up, it'll be adaptive. If the right circumstances don't come up, it won't be. So some chimpanzee communities are much more violent than others because of things like the frequency with which a large party of males is likely to meet a lone victim. And that's going to depend on the local ecology. But, so the overall answer to the question of what do chimps teach us is that we have to take very seriously the notion that in humans, the tendency to make war is a consequence of a long-term evolutionary adaptation and not just a military ideology or some sort of local patriarchal phenomenon. And of course, a reading of history, a judicious reading of history fits that very easily because war is so commonplace.
It's not an accident, so it's not a construction of human civilization. It's deeply within us, violence. But what is the difference between violence on the individual level versus group? It seems like with chimps and with wolves, there's something about the dynamic of multiple chimps together that increase the chance of violence. Or is violence still fundamentally part of the individual? Like, would an individual be as violent as they might be as part of a group?
If we're talking about killing, then violence in the sense of killing is very much associated with a group. And the reason is that individuals don't benefit by getting into a fight in which they risk being hurt themselves. So it's only when you have overwhelming power that the temptation to try and kill another victim rises sufficiently for them to be motivated to do it. The average number of chimpanzee males that attack a single male in something like 50 observations that have accumulated in the last 50 years from various different study sites is 8. 8 to 1. Now, sometimes it can go as low as 3 to 1. Another male on another foot, another male on... Another male, another arm. Now you have an immobilized victim with 4 individuals capable of just doing the damage. And so they can then move in and tear out his thorax and tear off his testicles and twist an arm until it breaks and do this, appalling damage with no weapons.
What is the way in which they prefer to commit the violence? Is there something to be said about the actual process of it? Is there an artistry to it? Warfare? Because different parts in history prefer different kind of approaches to violence. It had more to do with tools, I think, on the human side. But just the nature of violence itself, the practice, the strategy of violence is basically the same. You improvise, you immobilize the victim, and then just rip off different parts of their body kind of thing.
Yeah, you have to understand that these things are happening at high speed in thick vegetation, mostly, so that they have not been filmed carefully. We have a few little glimpses of them from one of them, like David Watts, who's got some great video, but we don't know enough to be able to say that. It's hard for me to imagine that there are styles that vary between communities, cultural styles, but it is possible. And one thing that is striking is that the number of times that an individual victim has been killed immediately has been higher in Kibale Forest in Uganda than in Gombe National Park in Tanzania. It's conceivable that's just chance. We don't have real numbers now, but I can't remember the exact numbers, but 10 versus 15 or something. So maybe they damage to the point of expecting a death in one place and they just finish it off in the other. But most likely that sort of difference will be due to differences in the numbers of attackers.
Human beings are able to conceive of the philosophical notion of death, of mortality. Is there any of that for chimps when they're thinking about violence? Is violence, like, what is the nature of their conception of violence, do you think? Do they realize they're taking another conscious being's life? Or is it some kind of, like, optimization over the use of resources or something like that?
I don't think I can't think of any way to get an answer to the question of what they know about that. I think that the way to think about the motivation is rather like the motivation in sex. So when males are interested in having sex with a female, whether it's in chimpanzees or in humans, they don't think about the fact that what this is going to do is to lead to a baby. Mostly.
You're right.
Mostly what they're thinking about is, I want to get my end away. And I think that it's a similar kind of process with the chimps. What they are thinking about is, I want to kill this
Yes.
individual, and it's hard to imagine that taking the other individual's perspective and thinking about what it means for them to die is going to be an important part of that. In fact, there's reasons to think it should not be an important part of it because it might inhibit them, and they don't want to be inhibited. The more efficient they are in doing this, the better. But I think it's interesting to think about this whole motivational question because it does produce the sort of rather haunting thought that there has been selection in favor of enthusiasm about killing. And in our relatively gentle and deliberately moral society that we have today, it's very difficult for us to face the thought that in all of us there might have been a residue and a more than that, sort of actively an active potential for that thought of really enjoying killing someone else. But I think one can sustain that thought fairly obviously by thinking of circumstances in which it would be true that the ordinary human male would be delighted to be part of a group that was killing someone. What you've got to do is to be in a position where you're regarding the victim as dangerous and thoroughly hostile.
But the pure enjoyment of violence. There's, I don't know if you know this historian Dan Carlin. He has a podcast. He has an episode, 3-4 hour episode that I recommend to others. It's quite haunting. But he takes us through an entire history. It's called Painfotainment. The history of humans enjoying the murder of others in a large group. So like public executions were long part of human history. And there's something that for some reason humans seem to have been drawn to just watching others die. And he ventures to say that may still be part of us. For example, he said if it was possible to televise, to stream online, for example, the execution and the murder of somebody, or even the torture of somebody, that a very large fraction of the population on Earth would not be able to look away. They'd be drawn to that somehow. As a very dark thought that we were drawn to that. Do you think that's part of us in there somewhere? That it's selection, that we evolved the enjoyment of killing and the enjoyment of observing those in our tribe doing the killing?
Yes, I mean, and that word you produced at the end is critical, I think, because it would be a little bit weird, I think, to imagine a lot of enjoyment about people in your own tribe being killed.
Right.
I don't think we're interested in violence for violence's sake that much. It's when you get these social boundaries set up, and in today's world, happily, we kind of are already one world. You have to dehumanize someone to get to the point where they are really outside our recognition of a tribe at some level, which is the whole human species. But in ancient times, that would not have been true, because in ancient times there are lots of accounts of hunters and gatherers in which the appearance of a stranger would lead to an immediate response of shooting on sight, because what was human was the people that were in your society, and the other things that actually looked like us and were human in that sense were not regarded as human. So there was a kind of automatic dehumanization of everybody that didn't speak our language or hadn't already somehow become recognized as sufficiently like us to escape the dehumanization contact.
And so hopefully the story of human history is that we are that tribalism fades away, that our dehumanization, the natural desire to dehumanize or tendency to dehumanize groups that are not within this tribe decreases over time. And so then the desire for violence decreases over time.
Yeah, I mean that's the optimistic perspective, and the great sort of concern, of course, is that small conflicts can build up into bigger conflicts, and then dehumanization happens, and then violence is released. As Hannah Arendt says, there currently is no known alternative to war as a means of settling really important conflicts.
So if we look at the big picture, what role has violence, or do you think violence has played in the evolution of Homo sapiens? So we are quite an intelligent, quite a beautiful, particular little branch on the evolutionary tree. What part of that was played by our tendency to be violent?
Well, I think that violence was responsible for creating Homo sapiens. And that raises the question of what Homo sapiens is.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So, nowadays people begin the sort of concept of what Homo sapiens is by thinking about features that are very obviously different from all of the other species of Homo. Mm-hmm. And our large brain, our very rounded cranium, a relatively small face. These are characteristics which are developed in a relatively modern way by about 170,000 years ago, say. That's one of the earliest skulls in Africa that really captures that. But it has been argued that that is an episode in a process that has been started substantially earlier, and there's no doubt that that's true. Homo sapiens is a species that has been changing pretty continuously throughout the length of time it's there, and it goes back to 300,000 years ago. 315 literally is the time, the best estimate of a date for a series of bones from Morocco that have been dated 3 or 4 years ago at that time, and have been characterized as earliest Homo sapiens. Now, at that point, they are only beginning the trend of sapienization, and that trend consists basically of gracilization, of making our ancestors less robust, shorter faces, smaller teeth, smaller brow ridge, narrower face, thinner cranium, all these things that are associated with reduced violence. Okay, so that's saying that's Homo sapiens beginning. So it began sometime 300 to 400,000 years ago, because by 315,000 years ago, you've already got something recognizable.
So you're more on that side of things, that those are this gradual process. It's not 150, 170,000 years ago. It started like 400,000 years ago, and it's just...
It started 300 to 400,000 years ago, and if you look at 170, it's got even more like us, and then if you look at 100, it's got more like us again, and if you look at 50, it's more like us again. Mm-hmm. It's all the way. It's just getting more and more like the moderns. So the question is, what happened between 300,000 and 400,000 years ago to produce Homo sapiens? Mm-hmm. And I think we have a pretty good answer now. And the answer comes from violence. And the story begins by focusing on this question. Why is it that in the human species, we are unique among all primates in not having an alpha male in any group, in the sense that what we don't have is an alpha male who personally beats up every other male? And the answer that has been portrayed most richly by Christopher Boehm, and whose work I've elaborated on, is that only in humans do you have a system by which any male who tries to bully others and become the alpha equivalent to an alpha gorilla or an alpha chimpanzee or an alpha bonobo or an alpha baboon or anything like that. Any male who tries to do that in humans
For 7. Not so productive.
Really? This?
No, not at all.
It's not very relaxing, I don't think.
This is what happens when you lose a penny. Can you imagine? Just like it just